what I think can skew towards the manipulative is people or companies that try to sell based on fear. And that might lead to an immediate purchase, but I don't know that it creates lasting value for the consumer.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hey there, No Labels, No Limits podcast listeners. Welcome back for another great episode. I'm Sarah Box, your host of the podcast, and you know that we are here on a mission to help individuals, teams, and organizations think outside the box, move beyond limiting beliefs, and create a profound impact in their own lives and in the lives of others. And we do this by sharing accomplished and inspiring guests who have challenged their own limits, overcome barriers, and had a different path in life that have brought them to be in this conversation with us here today. And the goal is always to have some fun, learn something we might not have known before, and then celebrate people who are out there making a difference. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. I'm really excited to be able to introduce Lizy Freudmann to you. She is a seasoned marketing strategist and the visionary behind One More Thing. And that's a strategic marketing company that is not only pioneering in its field, but also holds the distinction of being the first Certified B Corp in Louisiana. And with a dynamic background that spans her working with global brands like Honda and Nike to local startups, she has this deep love for storytelling and behavioral economics. And then she works with that to craft holistic brand strategies that resonate deeply with the company or the ventures audiences. She was educated at Brown and Tulane University, and her journey through the world of marketing is fueled by her passion for understanding human behavior and crafting narratives that engage and inspire. So you see a lot of alignment here between the podcast purpose and Lizy already. And whether it's a top 40 musician or a financial service institution, her approach is always about connecting on a human level and making meaningful impacts. So I've been thinking about all the different things I could talk with Lizy about. I'm going to ask her about what she's learned from Dragons and Future Worlds, her career journey, behavioral economics and how they can enhance relationships, and power of storytelling in business. And as you likely remember, we may throw in some other things along the way as we get going. So with that as an introduction, let's formally welcome Lizy Freudmann to the podcast. Hi, Lizy.
Hello. Thank you for having me. You made me sound awesome. I loved it. I should hire you to pump me up every morning.
Let me play the introduction for yourself. Put some background music on and jump around.
Yeah, like my walk-up music. It'll be great.
There we go. It's Lizy coming down the stairs. Okay, I do want to start with talking a little bit about science fiction and fantasy reading. Before I hit record, actually we were recording before I edited this, you and I were chatting about science fiction and fantasy. And the reason I want to ask you about that is I know in my life, it has shifted. Reading those types of books in general has shifted some of my perceptions in a really nice way, in a creative way. So let me ask you this, as an avid science fiction and fantasy reader, can you share one of your favorite books or authors, and then something you've learned or that really resonated to you or for you from those tales of Dragons and Future Worlds?
Yeah, it's a tough question because there are tons of great authors. I have to say probably Lizy Freudmann right now is an author. I've read all of her books. She is, to me, I find her to be really pioneering in the way that she experiments with science fiction and fantasy ideas, really more fantasy and less future world, more fantasy. urban fantasy, so fantasy like that takes place in real world environments, and also like other worlds. I think she's so interesting and super cool. And people might know her because she wrote the books that the Netflix series Shadow and Bone, I think the Netflix series is called, is based on. I learned a lot from her. Every time I read, I learn a lot about human potential in a lot of ways. Like there are some really interesting character arcs in her stories that are facilitated by magic, that magic allows to happen, I think, in ways that if you tried to make it set in reality, it would be much harder to see characters evolve in those ways. So there's actually infinite room for growth and development and change in worlds where reality is a race and we can like go beyond. I think that answers the question. Was there more? I can tell you, I mean, I could talk about this all day.
Let's just take it one more layer down from there. So I'm not familiar with her, this series, although I did note the Netflix series. As soon as we're done binge watching what we're doing now, I can check it out. But talk about the magic that's possible through her stories. Let's use her as an example, and the arcs, and then how that is different from real life, but maybe how that inspires you to be more like some of those characters.
So there's a lot in her books, in some of her books, most of her books. There are like close bonds between characters, especially the ones that the Netflix series was based on, which was originally like a young adult series, but really, I feel by the time the series was completed, had a much more mature view on the world, of these like communities of like ragtag bunch of revelers who are up against the world and using only their wits to survive. And one of the things I always learn, and I'm always inspired by anytime I read a book that has that sort of element to it, is the importance of picking good companions for your journey, whatever that journey is. Surrounding yourself with people who are better and different and more interesting than you think you are, because you need to complement your own talents and expertise, even when it can be hard. And you also never know what skills are going to come in handy. And that is something that comes up in fantasy a lot and that I have really tried to bring into real life. And it's actually very true. So
say more about that. Say more.
Oh gosh, you just never know what's going to be useful. I always think that like most of the time my interest in science fiction and fantasy does not come up in professional settings, but when it does, it's like its own meta example. When it does, it always opens a door for me talking about something that facilitates a conversation. And one of the things that I think it does best, or it's really effective in, is that like in future worlds or fantasy worlds where we're not constrained by reality and we can let go of the baggage of the real world. We can let go of like reality politics and like the weather and like all these other things that influence the way we interact with people. And we can use the imaginary world to find like ways that we connect or things that we share, and really extrapolate core values for what it means to be human and what it means to do good in the world, without being burdened by the things that drive us in like our human.
Yeah. I really like what you talked about, the importance of traveling with good companions.
Yeah, traveling with good companions is really powerful. I mean, like The Wizard of Oz is a really great example of that, right? Like in the movie, they couldn't get there if they didn't have each other, despite their own whatever limitations they perceived in themselves, right? And because it is fantasy, we are able to be more forgiving and generous, I think. And so I love to use I love it when people ask me about it because I feel like it's so great to encourage people to wonder and be creative. And that is also a beautiful thing about fantasy.
So, but I'm curious, when we think about let's use The Wizard of Oz. It's been around for decades and decades.
The movie or the book?
Well, both, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I've been around for decades and decades. Both have been around for as long as I've been around. They've been around. So, but the concept of the companion and bringing out the best in one another, it gets portrayed as fantasy, but I actually think that that's true. Like we want to say in real life or in our current day, all of that applies if we can suspend our logical mind or our judging mind or the mind that says not this or it has to be this or that, but not this and that. So I like where you kind of took that with it. Now I'm going to get back on my questions with you, but I really appreciate how you embrace the genre, that particular genre of reading. And I now need to re-listen to a couple of my favorite books and listen through the lens that you just put up there for me.
It's really powerful. I feel like every time I read a book, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I've gone through the world without thinking about it through this lens before. Like, wow, I didn't think about this, but now I'm thinking about this, and like, look at all the things I would have missed if I didn't. Like every time I read a book, it always surprises me at my ability to be surprised and impressed and refreshed anew at the perspective that like fantasy and speculative fiction can bring. But I don't know when this is going to air, but while we're recording this, it's the Olympics, and just to touch on the traveling with your companions theme, I think we've seen a real life version of that with the men's gymnastics. U.S. bronze, the first medal in however many years. It was such an interesting group, and they had, the pommel horse specialist who did nothing but pommel horse, but he like did his one thing and he did it super well and got us like us in the United States like over the point threshold. And so this set of complementary skills that like the team was composed of people, the right composition, the right mentality, the right skill set to do it.
Well, and to even support that for that individual, those skills, he honed them. He may have
only did that, yeah.
And he may have had the ability he may have had the physical predisposition to be able to do that, but he didn't just hop on that pommel horse and do it, right? So it's that like the unique thing, but then that we hone it and it becomes more polished and more, we can own it more when we do that.
So, and rather than try to be like the best all arounder, he's like, this is my thing, I'm going to do it. And then like, lo and behold, that's what we needed. So like.
Talk about the best example of niching down.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pivot a little bit here, if you would.
Sure.
And you have done a lot of different things in your marketing firm and how you've approached it, right? But I want to start with what inspired you to become the first B Corp in Louisiana.
Okay. Yeah, that's an easy one, actually. So I don't know if just in case anyone doesn't know what a B Corp is, it is a B Corp certification is a third-party certification where you go through a process of getting all of your business documents and processes audited by them to make sure they adhere to the highest standards of environmental thoughtfulness and human thoughtfulness and ethics. And it's an international certification run by different local agencies, obviously, because different regions in the world have different types of access to things. And I finished my certification process in 2020. It was like a 2-year long process the first time. You have to get recertified every 3 years. And it took a while, but I was looking for a way to affirmatively present my values as a person, and through in like a business context, right? Like, what was a way for people to know a little bit of who they were signing up to talk to? And I was working with a client who was a certified B Corp, based out of New York, that operated in a bunch of different states. And it was the first time I'd heard about it, and I was instantly intrigued. So I learned more and found it to be a very receptive and interesting community. So I went about it. It's not an easy certification to get. It requires a lot of legwork and attention. And I didn't actually know I was the first B Corp in Louisiana until I went to a conference last year, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is Lizy Freudmann's first B Corp in Louisiana." I was like, "Was I?" Because I didn't get it to be the first. I got it because I felt right to do. And so here we are. And it's been a great networking tool in the sense that it does connect me with other like-minded individuals locally, regionally, around the country, even around the world. So yeah, I love that there are now multiple B Corps in Louisiana, because that means like more people are being attentive to thinking about the environment and the community that their business operates in.
Yep. So what were a couple of the key lessons from that? It sounds like one of them was to stay throughout the process, right? What else did you learn from just going through that process?
I learned, I have 2 business master's degrees. I have an MBA and a master's in global management. I learned how much isn't covered in those curriculums in terms of creative ways of thinking about things, like governance structures that I'd never thought about. We learned a lot about like supply chain optimization in graduate school, but we didn't learn a lot about like what optimization really means and who's impacted by it. So I just learned a ton of stuff. I learned, it challenged the way that I thought about what best means. Is it most efficient? Is it most cost effective? Is it most just like consumer focused? What is it? So I learned a lot. There are a lot of practical things, like the way the system works now, and it's about to change, so I don't want to go into too much detail here. It's like you get points for different areas of how you structure your business, and you have to like reach a certain point threshold to get the certification. So I had to make some changes. One of the changes is I switched to a local bank because I wanted to bank locally, community-focused banking. Was one like very tactical, clear thing I learned about, why it's important to keep money in communities and buying from local vendors. It's just like a lot of stuff that like people talk about, but I learned really
why. Yeah, you learned the why the why behind the do.
The why behind the do, and like the actual thinking about it from a systemic perspective and not just like a one action perspective. If you keep the money in the community, the money gets spent again in the community. It like changes the way that the perceptions of local businesses, which impacts governance structures in local communities, which impacts, ability for communities to have schools. I mean, just the whole thing.
Right. It has a big ripple effect.
Yeah, it's a big ripple effect.
Yeah. I know. I never thought about that much. My husband's always been, he goes, no, let's look first in our local. I mean, like we're a conglomerate community of a couple of major, they butt up against each other. So if you're not from here, you think you're still in the same community, but you're not. But it's that whole thing. First, who can we buy that's local? If it doesn't exist here, then we'll go out, right? But
yeah,
who's here? Who can we use? That does good work. We're not here, we're not throwing money down the drain, but it's not hard. It's not hard to support local business. Even if you have to spend a little bit more, it really comes back to you.
I agree with that. I do agree with that. And I would like encourage anyone who listens to this not to view it as an all or nothing thing, because I think that one of the barriers that people face is like this anxiety of like, if I commit to shop local, even just internally, I'm never gonna be able to buy anything. I'm going to be like stressed about it. It's like, just try. Just say like, I want 10% more of my like, my purchases to support local businesses or small independent businesses or whatever. Just see if you can.
Well, and you can, if you do, that's so great, right? It's not all or nothing. It's like, look at what you spend on, and then, okay, do I have options locally I could do instead? If the answer is yes, do some. Don't do all, do some. And then pretty soon it's just habit, and you go, no, that's a good spot for this.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's fun. I mean, and that came down, especially during the pandemic. It's like businesses were closing and stuff. And it's like, okay, we don't typically eat out much, but we're going to spend money every month or every week, actually, in this one small family-owned Thai restaurant. Their food's really good. It wasn't like a hardship. But, and then, because they went to carry out and stuff, but it's like they thrived. And I said, when are you going to open up the restaurant part? She goes, we're going to hold off on that. We're doing better just takeout right now. But the community rallied around that and said, pick a restaurant. We don't care what restaurant. Patronize them.
Yep.
Keep them in business. So, and that's a tiny, tiny thing.
Yeah.
Tiny thing. So we kind of started talking about this when we talk about behavioral economics, right?
Yeah.
So that sounds like something that you have an interest in.
I do. And so I pulled up this definition from Wikipedia here because I want to, it's a robust thing. So Wikipedia defines it as the study of psychological, cognitive, emotional, cultural, and social factors involved in the decisions of individuals or institutions and how these decisions deviate from those implied by classical economic theory. And so that's like a big
mouthful.
It's a mouthful, and it encompasses a lot of stuff. So the way that I think about it is like the way that what motivates us to decide yes or no, even when the other decision might be in our best long-term interest, and how do we, from a marketing perspective, what makes something sticky, like resonate with people so that they aren't annoyed by it or upset by it if it comes into their inbox or they see it in their news feed or, they get a text message notification or whatever it is, like what makes it exciting. But there are lots of brands or lots of products or people that people like but don't buy from. So what is that missing piece? And so I always think about what behavioral economics is like, what motivates people to say yes or no, why they would say yes or no, and how they think about that decision in their, like, as satisfying an immediate need or a long-term need, and like what are these driving factors. So I'm really fascinated by it. I think a lot of times, me included, obviously, I'm a human being. Human beings are not super great at thinking about their best long-term outcomes.
So let's get specific. Let's just pick something out of the air, something that's familiar to you when you're working with people, of an example of that, and like how that decision can be supported through good marketing or actually thwarted so that we're not making our best decision. What are some of the tactics, I guess, that you've seen used that you like or you don't care for?
That's a good question. So a lot of the decisions are made on emotion, and good brands do a good job of capturing an emotion. And I don't want to say manipulation, although it is to some degree manipulation. I think some brands are more effective about being authentic and not misleading than others. What I think can skew towards the manipulative is people or companies that try to sell based on fear. And that might lead to an immediate purchase, but I don't know that it creates lasting value for the consumer. And so I don't know if you're focusing on consumer loyalty or you're going to, and from a marketing perspective, you're going to be constantly doing new customer acquisition because you need to like scare enough people into buying your vitamin or your, heart monitor or whatever it is and then like it may or may not be useful. So they need to have some amount of education as to like how it like fits into their whole lifestyle, but not so much information that it overwhelms their ability to decide. So like that sweet point is called like the satisfice level, where it's enough to like satisfy the information that you need. It's sufficient. And also to complement that like right amount of information with some amount of emotional resonance, so they feel good about the purchase immediately and then know how to use it long term.
So I've been curious for a while.
Did that answer?
It did answer. I mean, I could ask you, I do have more questions about it, but
Okay.
I've been curious about this as we have over the past many years become so much more of an influencer society, right? So even if this, like say someone's a marketing firm, maybe it's yours, has a very thoughtful strategy they're putting in place with a client, right? Or a customer. But it could be just blown out of the water by an influencer. So I'm wondering, I guess what I'm really wondering is at what point do we give over our thinking part to our emotion part when we have that FOMO, like that when you're saying, I don't want to miss out kind of thing, or this person's doing it, so I should do it kind of piece. How does that play out in all of this behavioral stuff? Does that make sense?
I think I wish I could say that there's like an exact moment in the decision-making process where people are like, well, this person said no, so I'm not going to do it. Or, well, this person said yes. But I think it's different every time with each type of product. And I think it's really important to like, think about like, well, you know, I might buy this like t-shirt because I see someone on like the internet or TV or whatever talking about it. But like, will I buy life insurance from them? Like, what type of product it is, and like whether these people have, or whether these influencers or these thought leaders or whatever it is, have actual credibility in that space. And from a brand perspective, when you're thinking about marketing, I think it's important to not make your brand too synonymous with any individual influencer or any like individual set of influencers, because you know opinions change. We see these like cycles of like being highly, you know, loved and like hated, and loved and hated, and like Taylor Swift is an example, right? Like some days she can do no wrong in the media, and other days she is like a villain. And so if you're relying on influence and credibility for your brand on someone who isn't invested in your brand as much as you are, and it can't speak fully to the values and like the actual value of the product or service you provide to customers, then that's like a bit risky.
So coming to your firm, how would you do that difference? Say I bring my business to you and I say, Lizy, here's our values, here's what our service is, or whatever it is. And I know you rely on storytelling to convey some of that. So what would you do with us?
Well, the first thing I would say is, what problem do you solve? What is the thing that people like? The example that I always use, and I have like a workshop if people are interested in exploring this more, is I call it the wet feet workshop. And the idea is like, if you were a person and you made rain boots and you said, Lizy, I make rain boots. I want you to help me sell more rain boots. I need to market more rain boots. I need a marketing campaign. I'd say like, cool, let's do it. But also remember, you're not selling rain boots, you're selling dry feet. Your customers need rain boots because their feet are wet. And like that comes with a whole bunch of logistical and emotional like baggage to have your feet wet all day long. So what is the problem that you are solving? And how do you express to them that you understand all of the problems tied up in wet feet? And that you can solve it, and you can solve it in a really effective way. And here's how, and here's why you're the best person to do it.
You make it sound so simple.
I do make it sound simple. It's really not. It's hard to get there. People fight, especially if you're doing it with a group. They argue back and forth about like what it is. And I always find that to be fascinating to see how like a group of executives or leaders or brand visionaries or whatever can have just slightly different takes on this. And so having that conversation is always really good for exposing where there's a disconnect, where people disagree and what people do agree on. So you can flesh out the part where people agree. And
I use that thinking, not the same approach, when I'm doing planning with groups, because everybody has in their, like, they'll agree, this is our thing we need to quote unquote get after, right? But when you start saying, well, tell me more about that, what does that mean, right? You have 8 to 10 different nuanced versions of what that means. Well, that means there are at least that many, if not more, different ways of going about it, right? But because the question wasn't posed, they didn't have a chance to share their thinking together. They're just thinking everybody else thinks like them.
Yep.
Isn't it clear? This is the problem we're solving, right? And it's feet that need socks to put in our rain boots, whatever. Yeah. So that's so brilliant of you to do that. And do people pretty much come together around something, or do you find they get sticky on other issues?
It really depends. I mean, sometimes people get frustrated with this process because they feel like it can be very limiting, and people are a little bit afraid of like narrowing it down. And I understand that. I mean, I'm a small business person too. I also get like anxious about, well, what if I'm being too specific? Will people not want to work with me, etc.? I get it. I really do. And I also think it's important to remember, like, your marketing is not forever. It's not like you are carving this into a mountain, right? Like, your business is where it's at today. These are the needs that you have. This is this product and services list that you have. What is the problem that you're solving today? And when the brand evolves, maybe the messaging evolves too. And to remember that you're in like a cycle, and your marketing is like a living thing. It's not like one and done. It's always. So encouraging people not to be afraid of committing to that message. And also, I encourage people to think of it really as like a scientific method sort of approach to marketing, which is like, if you don't have a lot of market research, like, you can do it, of course, do it. If you have market research, like based on buyer history or whatever, great, bring it to the table. And if you don't, or if you don't have it about the specific question that we're looking at, like, let's make some hypotheses about how people are going to feel about this brand, what problem it is solving, and how can we test that, and like, how do we course correct? So like, what are the paths, many paths forward?
Yeah, I love that freedom when you offer, let's just make some hypotheses. What are some? And it does leave some room for creativity. It leaves room for some of those dragons to get in the room, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let's just pretend, what if it were this? What would we think then? How might we tell our story then to get that point across? It can free you up, unless you are stuck in like, there's only one way to do it.
Yeah. And if people are like that, I'm probably not the right practitioner for them. Which is fine, right? Like, it's not always a fit. Like, I'm sure people exist in this world who will agree with them on the way to do it. But I think that thinking about things long term, midterm, short term, what ifs, hypotheses is what we think. This is why we think it. It leads to wanting to know your audience in a way that I think is important, to actually be authentic in interacting with them. And I really do think authentic brands perform the best these days. Unless
that's exactly where I wanted you to go. So, because when you're connecting, and you talked about the behavioral economics in that way as one way to connect more authentically with customers or your clients, right? If you're not being slimy. But how do we build those relationships? So I mean, I think people think of marketing as transactional, not relational.
Um, that's a mistake. Uh, I think. I think it's a mistake. I think even in or maybe redefining what it means to be transactional might be a better way to think about it, in the sense that even a transaction requires two-way dialogue. So even if you think of it as a transactional thing, like I give you something and you give me something in return, maybe you're instead imagine it as like, in this transaction, what is the feedback I'm getting? How is this offer being received? Why have we made this agreement to trade this for that? And what other agreements could be reached if we increase the amount of communication and mutual understanding?
So I'm just going to pause for a second, because listeners, it's really easy to listen to the words that Lizy's saying and maybe miss the impact of it. And because everything you just talked about is open inquiry, curiosity blended together about what else. What else could we know? What else might happen? What do we learn? What does this show us? What are other ways that we might be able to offer this? So it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I often am in my assumptions, but it seems to me that you approach things pretty open, even though you have a structure and know what is working and what will work for a client, what's been proven tried and true in your mind, but that you leave it open with curiosity to build it to fit the client. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's totally correct. Well, and I leave it for the client and for their audience, right? Because my goal is to make it like an exciting engagement for everybody. So like I'm open to hearing from the client what their goals are, and then like poking around to do some listening and seeing what people have to say too. So yeah.
You're an investigator.
I am. I'm a detective.
You are a detective on a dragon in current real life.
Yeah.
With your magic. Now, I'm just looking for the parallels. It's pretty good. So I just wanted to touch on one other topic briefly to get a view from you from either the high level macro or like down in the trenches. But, when we change industries, it can be kind of daunting. So when you shift your focus from one sector or cross sectors in marketing, how do you approach that in turn? Any challenges maybe that might come up into opportunities that you can leverage?
I know that I am brought onto a team to be the pommel horse expert, or whatever it is, right? Like I have the one set of skills that I'm brought into the team to help with. So it can be daunting when you switch industries, but like I always do my best to do a little bit of research beforehand, ask what I need to know, what the most important things I need to know. And then usually a lot of times if I'm entering a new space, people say like, I want your fresh eyes. Like your fresh eyes are really valuable. So I actually think like that can be a real asset to leverage. And then the other thing is I always am excited about an opportunity to learn about something I didn't know about before. So because I don't need or especially want to be the smartest person in the room in every area, and I'm content to like know what my perspective is that I need to bring. I think that a lot of that, if I understand the question correctly, it doesn't trip me up as much as it might if I looked at it in another way.
That makes sense. Yep. Because if you're coming at it from a fixed, it has to look like this piece. It's always feels like a push.
Yeah. Um, like it's just you can't be an expert in everything. Um, and that's okay. It's something I learned when I became a homeowner. It's like I wanted to learn how to do like wire my electrics and like be a plumber and like I just can't. I can't. I don't have the capacity to learn every skill I would need to not hire professional plumbers or electricians or like installers. Like it's too much. I need to know just enough to be able to say like this is what I want or this is what I need or like something isn't working. And then bring in the person who knows way more about that because that's what they do.
Yep. Nope. Surrounding yourself with the companions you're traveling with.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm telling you, you are consistent from the get-go. So I'm going to give you the last word. Well, I think it's great. I love to hear people tell you their stories if you listen, from words and anchor points and stuff. So I like that you recognize that, but also know you want to get someone in who knows more than you, that you know enough to know what you need.
Yeah.
But you don't have to know how to do it. And honestly, I do not want to be the person who wires our electric.
I don't either. Now that like I understand how much specialization goes into it, right? Like some of it is knowing like just you don't know what you don't know. So like I didn't know what I didn't know. Now I know. So I'm like, okay, I could either make this like a full-time job of like learning how to do every type of home repair, or I could like get good enough at it to be like, gotta call the plumber.
Yeah. And there's some things you do quicker than others. It's like, I'm not going to tinker around with plumbing when things are backing up.
Yeah.
911 plumber.
Yeah.
Or 411, I guess. But so I'm going to let you have the last words of wisdom on the podcast. And I'm going to ask you to share your thinking about cultivating imagination and leave us with a thought about that, if you would.
Yeah. This is my another favorite topic. I love talking about imagination. Well, I think reading is great. A reading exercise, and reading makes you more empathetic. It makes you understand that the world is so big. Like reading non-fantasy books from around the world, when you see the lives of people in other places, real or stories. And then, of course, fantasy science fiction allows you to push beyond the constraints of realities. So read. Engage in thought experiments as much as possible. I think that I noticed a couple of years ago when I was working with clients, the ones that I liked the most at every point, like in most meetings, someone would say, well, I wonder what would happen if? And I was like, I love that there's room for wonder here. Like both the type of wonder that is like delight and surprise and the type of wonder that is curiosity. So like we're creating space for that in the table in these meetings. So I would say like engage in thought experiments and don't be afraid to come up with something wild, because you can always dial it back, but it's harder to leap forward. And then avoid groupthink as much as possible, which is a really hard one, and I am not qualified to speak on it, but there are people who are. Be mindful of behavioral dynamics with regards to groups. Are like as a leader, if you're leading an organization, do you create space for dissent or differing viewpoints? If you're a person who has to report into a leader, do you feel comfortable expressing those things? What would you need to be different for you to express a different opinion? And understand your own what points you're willing to flex on and what you're not, so that you don't look back and say, like, how did we get here?
So that's being brave as well.
Yeah.
Standing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. That's a very hard thing to do. But I do think that it is a form of imagination to say, like, well, I don't know that we're headed down the right road because I can see like 10 steps from now what this chessboard might look like, and I don't like the way the game looks. So that's a certain type of bravery. So cultivate that bravery and like try to anticipate multiple moves ahead and what the board layout might be down that road is a way to cultivate imagination in a way that feels safe and values aligned.
Awesome. And remember, you guys, when we're imagining, we're opening up possibilities. It doesn't mean we have to choose them or go down the road.
We're not committing.
No, we're imagining.
Yeah.
When we were little, we all liked imagining. So let's get back to imagining. So I want to thank you a lot, Lizy, for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. Listeners, if you found value in what Lizy was sharing with us, and come on now, I know you found some somewhere in there because there was a lot of nuggets. Share the episode with a friend. Just say, hey, this is what I learned from Lizy. Let's go ahead and share that. We will have all of her contact information in the show notes so that you can reach out to her, learn more about her and the work she's doing in the world. And we will be back next week with another great guest on the No Labels, No Limits podcast.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.